Hello, friends. Welcome to Science Talk. I am your host, Jim Massa. I want to discuss with you a topic that I have not seen much reported on, and I find this to be, interesting from a scientific aspect, troubling from, I guess you could say, a climate societal aspect. And this is a paper that appeared in EOS, and the title, which, and this appeared. It was published on 5 November 2021, a paper by Doug Johnson. And the title is as follows: Kelp's carbon sink potential could be blocked by coastal darkening. And the subtitle will be Coastal Darkening, an environmental threat researchers are only beginning to study, is found to dramatically reduce the productivity of kelp. That, of course, is indeed troubling to hear that. Basically, for this paper here, gentleman goes to New Zealand. I'm probably going to pronounce this incorrectly, and I apologize, but it's the Hauraki Gulf. And basically, he talks about waves smashing against cliffs, uh, and then transporting sedimentary material into the ocean. Boats, storms stirring up the silt and clay from the sea bottom. Rivers will carry fertilizer from the mainland that will then result in light blocking algal blooms mingling with the pollution from nearby Auckland. And then all these factors working together uh, cloud the coastal ocean. Basically makes things very turbid that your visibility kind of basically goes to crap, and the result is that any organisms that are living further down in the water column, they're going to be deprived of their main source of energy, sunlight. So this is obviously a problem and of concern. So, as an environmental threat, this phenomenon is called coastal darkening, and it's poorly studied. And so there's an increasing amount of work trying to understand how this occurs. I outlined some factors that possibly involve, what it could mean for the ocean and life within it. And the author goes on to start referencing various papers that have looked at some of this here, including that coastal darkening could stunt and shift the relative abundance of different phytoplankton populations. That's critical. They're the primary producers. Other paper noted that coastal darkening might delay the timing of phytoplankton blooms, with potential consequences for the organisms that rely on them. If their timing goes off, and then the zooplankton reproduce, to have their, the youngs hatch out to time with the graze on the phytoplankton, um, they miss the timing and their mortalities could increase. And if you have fish spawning to time it to eat the zooplankton, well, you can see the cascading implications that would happen. And recent research suggests that coastal darkening may also amplify the effects of climate change. Well, that's interesting. So, Caitlin Blaine, who's a marine ecologist at the University of Auckland, says that coastal darkening can severely hinder the growth of kelp, reducing its productivity by up to 95%. Holy crap. That's majorly significant. This drop in kelp's productivity could have a range of consequences for fish and other organisms that use the kelp for food or shelter, really. It could also impair the kelp's ability to sequester carbon, with obvious consequences for the global climate. To ascertain this finding, Blainer and a team went out into Hauraki Gulf to examine 7 kelp forests. which are mostly composed of the species Eclonia radiata. At each site, they set up two light loggers, one at the surface and one 10 meters down among the kelp to measure the availability of sunlight coming in. Each of the seven kelp forests was mired by varying levels of particulates in the water. The sites closer to urban areas like Auckland or to rivers that run through agricultural land tended to be more obscured than those further from the terrestrial inputs of particulate pollution. Over the course of a year, the team returned to the site 4 times and measured the growth of 20 sample kelps, both in the wild and in the lab, basically doing control, so they have a control. The team also encased specimens in photorespirometry chambers to gauge how much oxygen each produced with different amounts of light. So, uh, respirometry, that's measuring basically respiration rates, and then photo, obviously, light induced. So, according to Blaine, the amount of oxygen that kelp produces is roughly equal to the amount of carbon it uses to grow, and thus the amount of carbon is sequestered. So basically, it appears to be a 1-to-1 ratio. Scientists found that because of the sunlight blocking effect of particulate pollution, the darkest site received 63% less sunlight than the lightest one. This significant reduction of light meant that at the darkest site, the kelp's primary productivity, the rate at which it converts sunlight energy into organic matter, was 95% lower. The kelps growing these accumulated 2 times less biomass. Overall, the team found that coastal darkening caused the kelp forest to fix up to 4.7 times less carbon. If it's fixing that much less carbon, that means there's less biomass for the primary consumers, which then impact the tertiary levels or the secondary consumers. So this will have significant ripple effects through the food web, food chain, and overall secondary and tertiary productivity. Research from 2016 suggests that the world's kelp forests sequester as much as 200 million tons of carbon each year. However, the extent to which kelp forests act as a sink in the global carbon cycle is still not clear, still needs to be ascertained better. Dr. Blaine states that we are learning that kelp forests are some of the most productive ecosystems on the planet and are likely important contributors to carbon sequestration. However, their contribution is highly species and location specific and is ultimately degraded by human impacts such as coastal darkening and climate-driven shifts in temperature. And then Oliver Zielinski, who basically operated the Coastal Ocean Darkening Project at the University of Oldenburg in Germany, which is no longer in operation, says that although researchers are beginning to understand most of the causes behind the phenomenon, there's still much to learn about its broader impact on aquatic life in the ocean at large. It needs much more thorough investigation. Well, if you're already having a reduction of 95% productivity, 4.6 times less productivity overall, in terms of less carbon, biomass basically, it's reasonable to hypothesize that the effect through the rest of the food chain and food web will be deleterious. Obviously, coastal darkening is complex because of the various factors involved, the ones I mentioned at the outset of this video. It is the culmination of myriad processes on land and in the ocean, and the precise causes vary from coast to coast, basically from location to location. One cause, for instance, involves plant matter from trees falling into rivers. Basically, you have becoming dissolved organic carbon material, and then you get these trees, they flow out into the ocean. You get this dark organic carbon matter, almost like think of tannic acids or tannins, and you just get this brownish coloring to the water, well, that will effectively block sunlight. So in cases like that particular situation with trees, well, how bad things are depends on what type of trees you've got, the species. The leaves, twigs will break down into different compounds with differing effects on the light. In Norway, for example, concerted tree planting efforts have somewhat ironically caused an increase in coastal darkening. Learning to mitigate coastal darkening, says Therese Harvey, a marine ecologist and biooptician at the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, not involved in the study, says that scientists will be required to tackle it from broad interdisciplinary perspective. Well, as an oceanographer, I can tell you that oceanography is one of the most interdisciplinary sciences going about. You can't, not if you want to really do a good job of things. If you want to study the biology, you got to look at the physics. You want to, look at the physics. You got to see how the physics affects the chemistry, which affects the organisms, and then, of course, especially in shallow locations, what's the geology? What's the substrate doing? Everything is intertwined. Obviously, minimizing further anthropogenic warming is an important step to help mitigate coastal darkening. Climate change is set to cause some parts of the world to get more rain. This could in turn mean more detritus, organic material, and fertilizer reaching the ocean, which implies enhancing the coastal darkening effects or exacerbating the situation. So, Dr. Blaine goes on to state that if we can, to combat coastal darkening, will be a way to also deal with climate change as well. At a local level, because each coast experiences it differently. Further, there are steps such as prohibiting development near some bodies of water or fighting coastal erosions that can be done, resulting in easy and quick to see improvements. So, despite the complexity of the problem involving the threat posed by coastal darkening, when you boil it right down, is rather simple. It affects light. Affects sunlight energy, and how, of course, impact the organisms in the sea. Simple as that. So, do something to improve the sunlight energy reaching the aquatic systems there, and that might help. So I bring this to your attention because I certainly was unawares of this, and the aspect that kelp is important in sequestering carbon. So it makes sense that anything to help the kelps out would then help improve the carbon sequestration would be a good thing, and one that should be pursued to enhance their abilities to sequester carbon. On the other hand, if you block out the sunlight energy and we have these reductions in kelp, well, the implications, not only from a carbon sequestration aspect, but the implications for the food chain is it should be obvious to folks, and the effects would not be good. So there you have it. Coastal darkening, another issue that we need to be thinking about and taking steps to mitigate. Thank you for your time. Hello, folks. This is Jim here with Science Talk, asking you to please subscribe to my channel and to inform others of my channel and of the work that I do. Please share to social media platforms that you use. Also, as a reminder, don't forget to click the bell so that you know when I load up more videos. Finally, I ask that you support the work that I do by becoming a patron at patreon.com. Details in the description box below. Thank you for your support.